What's the US planning for the Middle East? President Donald Trump is in the region to cement his plan for peace in Gaza. He says the end of the war ushers in a historic new dawn. But can he succeed where his predecessors have failed? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Neave Barker. US President Donald Trump made a last-minute trip to the Middle East on Monday in the wake of the Gaza ceasefire deal. He landed in the Egyptian resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh late on Monday after having flown in from Israel, where he addressed the Israeli Knesset and praised the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. The first phase of Trump's 20-point ceasefire plan has now been completed, with Hamas releasing all 20 living Israeli captives in Gaza and Israel freeing Palestinian prisoners in the occupied West Bank after the earlier withdrawal of its forces from some areas in Gaza. So will this deal finally bring peace in the region, or is it another missed opportunity? And what does Trump's plan mean for the broader Middle East? We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Imogen Kimber.
US President Donald Trump told the Israeli Knesset he had high hopes for his ceasefire deal and peace in the region.
This is not only the end of a war, this is the end of an age of terror and death. It's the start of a grand concord and lasting harmony for Israel and all the nations of what will soon be a truly magnificent region. I believe that so strongly. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
He was on his way to the Egyptian resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh, where he is gathering major global and regional powers to invest in his 20-point plan. The plan includes an interim authority to govern Gaza. Trump says he has an idea of who will be on the board that will oversee the strip, although only former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair has been named. An international force will provide security, alongside Palestinians trained abroad. Reconstruction of Gaza, including who is paying for it, is a major issue.
I don't know about the Riviera for a while, because you take a look at what you have. You have to get people taken care of first. But it's going to start really essentially immediately. I mean, they're going to have to start by removing a lot of the structures that you see that are down to the ground. I mean, it's blasted. This is like a demolition site.
The World Bank puts the reconstruction cost in Gaza at $53 billion and could take 14 years. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas attended the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected Gaza being run by the Palestinian Authority, but it's not been dropped by Blair or Abbas. Iran, which backs Hamas, was invited but declined. Tehran's power in the region has suffered a setback since the war on Gaza began. Along with Hezbollah, whose popular leader Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated by Israel, has been significantly weakened and is now under pressure to disarm. The political landscape in Syria has also changed, with the ousting of Bashar al-Assad and the establishment of an authority that is working with Western powers and other regions. Trump says he is bringing an end to a centuries-old conflict.
We're going to build a legacy that all the people of this region can be proud of. New bonds of friendship, cooperation, and commerce will join Tel Aviv to Dubai, Haifa to Beirut, Jerusalem to Damascus, and from Israel to Egypt.
While some in the region are sceptical, he is seen to be carving out his and America's influence in the Middle East as a new order takes shape. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
OK, let's bring in our guests in Cairo. Sarah Eltantawi, she's professor at Fordham University in New York City, a political analyst and a writer in New York. Yezid Sayigh, senior fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center, and in Miami, Kenneth Katzman. Senior Fellow at the Soufan Centre and a former Senior Analyst with the Congressional Research Service. A very warm welcome to all three of you. Welcome to Inside Stories. Sarah, given that all of this is going to be happening in Egypt over the next few days and you are there, does the signing of the peace accord in Egypt represent to you a new order in the Middle East, a real true break from the past, or a continuation of the old order that led to many of these frictions that arose from the colonial carving up of the Middle East? How would you, Sarah, reflect on this moment?
Well, thank you for having me. I would describe it as a new instantiation of the fact that the old order has not gone anywhere. So the way I would expand on that is that for the last 2 years, many of us have been watching what's happened in Gaza with the worst case scenario fear in mind. And that worst case scenario is that the right-wing elements in Israel would have their way, that the Gazan people would be expelled, that that territory would be turned into a casino, and there would be a completely new and horrific order that would take place in Gaza. What's actually happened is that, in fact, the same players that have been involved in Oslo, that have been involved in Camp David in the case of Egypt, are now back at the table hosting this latest ceasefire. So it shows that as radical as certain factions want to get in this conflict, there is no solution to the conflict, it would seem, outside of the participation and the buy-in, and frankly, the financial assistance and the political buy-in of the regional players, including Egypt.
Kenneth, turning to you, Sarah seems to suggest that this is an iteration of the Oslo Accords. Do you agree?
Well, thank you for having me. I don't necessarily agree it's a continuation of the Oslo Accords. I mean, the Oslo Accords were supposed to lead to a Palestinian state, and unfortunately it got derailed due to distrust on both sides, and don't want to relitigate that, but it didn't lead to what was expected. Now we have a new chance, I suppose, to build a new Palestinian political structure. We have to see if Hamas does disarm, if there is eventually, as the Trump plan delineates, the Palestinian Authority coming back into Gaza. If we have stability, then we can perhaps revive the Oslo Accords, perhaps, and try to move forward into resolving some of these final settlements, final status issues. I think we're a long way from that right now, but that's the hope.
Of course.
The problem is, Hamas refuses to disarm. That's the problem I see.
Yeah, and we will get to that very shortly. Yezid, what does this moment, do you think, mean personally for Donald Trump, who has talked about bringing an end to the 3,000 years of war in the Middle East? I mean, when he addressed the Israeli Knesset earlier, he said that this was a historic dawn of the new Middle East, a speech in which he praised also the Israeli military. No mention whatsoever of 2 years of utter carnage, the genocide in Gaza, the slaughter of tens of thousands of Palestinians. I mean, what do these claims by Donald Trump say to you? Does it speak of a regional reset?
Well, I think President Trump is clearly going right away for a regional reset to create basically an alliance of the United States with important regional states, especially in the Gulf, but of course also Israel's other neighbors in Egypt and Jordan, to cement a new kind of regional order. We heard talk of a new regional order from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last year. I mean, I think that was unrealistic and not his true goal. But I think Donald Trump does seek a new order, a new Pax Americana, if you like. Now, the thing is that all this hinges on the Gaza ceasefire holding and then transitioning to the next phases of Trump's own 20-point plan. If we end up instead in a stalemate where there's a ceasefire but nothing else, then he may find it very difficult to maintain this new kind of political alliance with Arab states that do want to see meaningful political progress towards Palestinian statehood. So I think that Donald Trump needs to focus not on the next 24 hours, but where he'll be in a year's time, that is when we can assess whether he can claim that he's made peace in the region and deserves the Nobel Prize.
OK, that is the much coveted prize he's after, of course. Sarah, I mean, the Americans do, of course, have two key aims in this peace summit: getting the region to commit to the future security of Gaza and getting regional powers to pay for the redevelopment, the reconstruction of Gaza. Gaza's in ruins, lives are in tatters. I mean, do we even know how committed Israel and Hamas is to a lasting peace? We have seen, Sarah, as you know, many false dawns in the past where Israel has simply resumed its conflict. What's different this time, Sarah?
I'm not quite sure. We did see this in January of this year, and by March, Israel had violated the peace agreement or the ceasefire. So, you know, I think what's different this time is the sheer scale of the ceremony around it, the buy-in, the official buy-in from Arab states and many important European leaders as well. But I am concerned, having watched Trump's speech in Tel Aviv at the Knesset earlier today. Like you mentioned, there's just no mention whatsoever of the Palestinians, of the genocide that they've endured over the last 2 years. It's as if Trump is speaking to, I mean, he is speaking to the Knesset, but from an American perspective, he's speaking to this ultra, what's now in America called the Israel First sort of faction of his party, which is actually quickly losing steam domestically. And so I'm worried that even Trump representing the United States is representing an increasingly diminishing political power inside the United States, not monetarily, but politically. And if he's not going to position the United States as any kind of honest broker, which frankly the US has not had a good record of, including with the Oslo Accord, then it's hard to be optimistic about intentions, you know, as you put it. Right. But like your last guest just said, the real important issue is that the ceasefire holds. And if it can hold for a significant amount of time, then we will be in a different situation. OK, well,
let's look at some of the details in the 20-point plan. Kenneth, point number 9 of Trump's peace plan talks of Gaza being governed by a temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of Gaza. Our discussion, of course, is about the possibility of a new Middle East emerging here, where Hamas agrees to disarm, of course, and then disband. Firstly, will that happen, in your opinion, Kenneth? And what might a new Palestinian leadership look like?
Well, Hamas has agreed to yield governing power to this committee that's stipulated under the Trump plan. But of course, we know, and I forget what point number it is, but the Trump plan does provide for the Palestinian Authority to be reformed and undergo changes, and then ultimately replace this technocratic committee and resume governing Gaza as it did prior to, I guess, 2007, when Hamas killed the Fatah members and took over completely. So if that roadmap is followed, and we do have a PA return to Gaza, and it's secure, and the international forces train Palestinian forces as stipulated in the plan, and there is Hamas is disarmed, or at least, you know, is not actively fighting anymore in the streets or fielding a militia, then we could potentially have you know, a new Middle East. But it's going to take time. This is not going to happen in the next 2 weeks. This is a long-term plan, as the other guests have said.
Yezid, I mean, just building on what we've heard there from Kenneth, I mean, any kind of Palestinian leadership would surely emerge against a huge number of odds stacked against it. I mean, Israel, we know, has long been accused of a divide and rule approach to dealing with the Palestinians, of pitching rival factions against each other to weaken their claim to statehood. Israel has been accused, specifically also in Gaza, during the past couple of years, of specifically arming gangs there as well, of infiltrating groups in the West Bank too. There's a danger, Yezid, that Netanyahu, who's made no secret of being firmly against the notion of a Palestinian state, continuing to foment division amongst the Palestinians themselves, Yezid.
Absolutely. And of course, arming plans inside Gaza, which then attack Hamas or Hamas retaliates against them and asserts its control of the streets, could also be used quite cynically by Netanyahu as a justification for abrogating the ceasefire and going back to war against Hamas. But I think the crucial thing you've put your finger on here is that Netanyahu and his far-right allies are absolutely committed to preventing Palestinian statehood and to annexing the West Bank. And so what I think is very interesting about the Trump plan is specifically that it talks about deploying an international stabilization force in Gaza to take over from withdrawing Israeli troops and setting up international governance over Gaza, basically a trusteeship. It also emphasizes the need and the right of Palestinians in Gaza to be able to exit and return to their territory and for economic revival, which of course means free, full, or very near full and free movement of goods in and out of the Gaza Strip. All of that adds up to taking Gaza out of the overall control that Israel has exercised for 57 years over Gaza. Now, I'm not optimistic this is going to happen, but my point is that that is what the Trump plan lays out. The deployment of troops, peacekeepers, is meant to happen immediately, and the other elements, reconstruction and so on, are meant to start immediately as well. All of this, I think, threatens Netanyahu and his far-right allies in particular with the prospect that countries around the world that now recognize the state of Palestine will say, here is the first territorial base of the state of Palestine. It exists. And so now we will focus on bringing the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which is now under Palestinian Authority rule, within that same territorial boundary of the Palestinian state. I think this opens up a huge can of worms for Netanyahu, goes directly against his ideological commitments. And I think it is inevitable that he will sabotage the process or bog it down in any way to prevent that further transition.
Inevitable, this whole process may be sabotage. It's a rather bleak outlook, considering we are at the early stages of what many hope will be the beginning of the end of this conflict. But many thanks for your perspective there, Yezid. Putting that to Sarah, you were nodding along. I mean, what difference really does the 20-point plan mean? I mean, will this newfound momentum have any kind of impact on the wider occupation? Surely no change there, with no change to the system of apartheid that has made Palestinians second-class citizens in their own land for the past 70 years, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, there's ample reason to not be optimistic, right? I mean, we have all been in a state of absolute depression watching what has happened in Gaza for the last couple of years. I keep returning to this international body that will be overseeing the transition and this trusteeship. And I also keep coming back to the way that Western publics are shifting their opinion on this issue. It's a bit of a wild card. If these, traditionally we're used to, frankly, the Western powers really being subsidiaries of the Israeli position, particularly the United States. But that element may change. And one thing that's very important is that the eyes of the world need to remain on this issue and need to remain on Gaza. And if that continues, and the publics in the West that are becoming very unhappy with the way that the Palestinian cause has been handled in the West, if people can continue to pressure their governments to oversee this transition in a way that is more equitable to the rights of the Palestinians.
Yeah, just to clarify for our viewers and listeners, what you're referring to is the Oversight Committee, the so-called Board of Peace that's meant to be chaired by Donald Trump. Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister's name, has been mentioned. Considering how reviled Tony Blair is in the Middle East, I wonder very briefly, Kenneth, whether you think that is a bit of a non-starter.
Thank you. Well, I don't know that it's a non-starter. I think it's not going to amount to much of any significance. I mean, the issue is, do you get, Palestinian governance in Gaza that is not Hamas? And if you do, I think this Board of Peace is not going to amount to much. I mean, it might, have some influence initially, but as time goes on, and particularly if the Palestinian Authority persons redeploy into Gaza and take over governance in Gaza, I think the board of peace will wither into something that's not that relevant. But let me just push back on, I think many conversations we've including this conversation, we're focusing on Netanyahu's ideology and his hardline allies. And, let's understand the October 7th attack was a deep psychological blow inside Israel. So I would argue it's the Israeli public that right now does not support a Palestinian state. There was public support in the past during the Oslo period, and as there were negotiations with the PLO and the Palestinian Authority got set up, there was support. After October 7th, support for a Palestinian state evaporated. So it's not, I think, appropriate or correct.
Right. So we're not starting in any way from the same. We're not in any way, in your view, starting from the same position as we were when it comes to the Oslo Accords. I wonder if as we reach the last sort of 8-9 minutes of the show, widen this conversation out a little bit to the Middle East in general. I mean, Yezid, at the time of recording, Israel is still bombing southern Lebanon. I mean, what does this fresh energy when it comes to Gaza mean for Hezbollah?
I think the situation in Lebanon is entirely dependent on what Israel decides to do next. Hezbollah has refrained from responding to almost daily Israeli attacks and strikes inside Lebanon since the ceasefire was agreed almost a year ago. And my big fear, of course, is that the ceasefire in Gaza, unless it picks up momentum on the political front, the reconstruction front, and so on, that the ceasefire in Gaza will end up looking like the one in Lebanon, where Israel unilaterally decides that it sees a threat or a target and goes after it. But I do want to come back to something, if you'll allow me to, that Kenneth said. I agree very much with him that we're not starting from where we were 30 years ago or 25 years ago. I have emphasized what I see as an intriguing opening in the Trump plan, the idea of placing Gaza under some form of international governance and, if you like, trusteeship and protection. That would be a game changer if we ever get there. Right. But that doesn't mean we're going to get to an agreed two-state solution anytime soon, frankly, not in my lifetime.
All right.
Because I think of everything that has happened in the last 25 years on both sides.
I really want to turn my attention to Syria as well. I'm going to put this back to you, Kenneth. The country, obviously, under the leadership of Ahmed al-Sharaa. The country is currently on a path very much approved by Western powers and under US pressure is said to be accelerating talks with Israel for this security pact that Damascus may or may not agree to. Israel may or may not agree to it as well. Might Israel consider reversing the seizure of Syrian lands? Is there any scope for a settlement between Syria and Israel going forward after this?
Well, I think Mr. Trump is going to push for that because he realizes, as many of us do, that the overthrow of the Assad regime was the single most dramatic blow to the Islamic Republic and its axis of resistance than we've seen since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The overthrow of Assad has destroyed Iran's regional strategy. There's no other way to really paint it. And I think Mr. Trump and his aides realize they need to do everything possible to make sure that Iran does not regain a foothold in Syria, that the new government succeeds, that Syria's democratization proceeds. It's going to be messy. It's been messy already. And I think Mr. Trump is going to try to work out a security agreement between al-Sharaa and Netanyahu. I think he's going to try very hard to do that.
And so turning to Iran, because Donald Trump, speaking in Jerusalem earlier, said if Iran had the nuclear weapon, Arab nations wouldn't be comfortable making the deal that we have now. He also said that what would be great is if we can make a peace deal with Iran. Arguably, Iran, without being directly involved in the conflict in Gaza, has been able to weaken the possibility of the Abraham Accords ever being realised. What do you make of these hopes by Donald Trump and how Iran figures in all of this?
Well, it's interesting. Before the October 7th attacks, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, said that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, then we have to get a nuclear weapon. That's it for regional security. We don't want to have to do that, but that will be the reality. Well, now the game has really changed. And in the interim period, you've had Saudi meeting with their Iranian counterparts and warming relations, at least relatively speaking. So I think that Trump is speaking about a logic that has changed. He's speaking from the point of view of a logic that has changed a bit. And frankly, after the attacks on Qatar by Netanyahu, and really the seven front war that Israel is fighting in the region, regional actors understand that the security game has changed and that the United States cannot guarantee security absolutely for anyone in this region. And so perhaps that is why Trump is starting to talk about peace with Iran, because he knows that the game has changed and that they can't be contained in quite the same way.
Yezid, last word to you. I mean, what, of course, does this then mean for the so-called axis of resistance that Iran very much positioned itself as the head of, Yezid?
I think the axis of resistance is a secondary concern for Iran. It's part of its deterrence and defense strategy. It's not a goal in and of itself. And I think reaching some kind of acceptable deal with the United States of America will be something the Iranian leadership will accept, regardless of the internal debates and divisions between hardliners and others. I think what's really interesting to wrap up here is that President Trump is clearly separating between what happens with Gaza and the Palestinians. This has never been a primary concern of any U.S. administration, and there's never been real pressure on Israel over that one issue. But when it comes to U.S. regional interests and national interests in the rest of the Middle East, that is where the U.S. position has at times diverged from that of Israel. And I think what President Trump is doing is laying out the contours of the kind of Middle East regional order that the United States administration, his administration, wants to see in the future. And that has to include resolving relations with Iran, not just for the U.S., but of course also for the Gulf allies of the U.S., who particularly don't want a war with Iran. So I think Trump is angling in a very interesting way. And the question really for him is to sustain his attention and interest and make sure that the elements that allow that to emerge happen, which is partly a process with Iran on the one side and dealing with Gaza and the Palestinian situation insofar as Arab allies insist on it.
Maintaining the president's interest has been a key issue for so many observers looking at what's happening in Egypt in the wake of this ceasefire and what many hope, of course, will be a permanent end to the conflict. Jury's out as to whether or not this is a regional reset, but we most certainly are at a crossroads in the region. Many thanks, Kenneth Katzman, Sarah Eltantawi, Yezid Sayigh. A pleasure to have you on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Neave Barker, and the entire team here in Doha, it is bye for now.